All right, guys, welcome back to the Agent Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Caffarella. We've got a great guest from Utah, Cody Steck. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you. Super excited to be here. I love talking about investing.
Thank you. Yeah, we both had some tech issues. We were trying to figure out who to blame. We're going to have maybe a little bit of an unconventional look, but we're going to deliver all the information that we need to help all of you agent investors take your investing to the next level. So, Cody, like I mentioned, a couple minutes ago before the show started, can you kind of just give our listeners a little bit of background about like how you got into real estate, why you got into real estate, and how you started investing, kind of like the origin story for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into real estate. Obviously I'm an agent as well as I think probably most of the listeners are. And I got started on the investing side. For whatever reason, from a young age, I'd always wanted to buy my first house as quickly as I could. So saved up some money. I was just working, dead end jobs, whatever, going through college, made it 2 years through college. And during that time, actually saved up enough money to go out and buy my first townhome, and bought that townhome, lived in it, moved out of mom and dad's place. And after making one mortgage payment, I decided, wow, this kind of sucks actually having to pay a mortgage that's like half your income. So I decided to get some roommates and started house hacking. Basically got 2 roommates to live in the other 2 bedrooms. And that's when it kind of clicked for me. I was like, wait a minute, I was paying, roughly $1,200 to live here. Now I'm only paying $400, which was the cost of my room after the rent of the other 2. And that kind of got my wheels spinning. And I thought, what if I just moved back in with mom and dad, rented out my bedroom? Now I'm just renting it to 3 single guys or whoever. And now I'm cash flowing on a property and I don't have anything out of pocket. So that's kind of what got me started on investing. From there, I kind of just went down the rabbit hole of reading about investing, bigger pockets, looking at YouTube, just talking to people in my local market, and started going to some local investment clubs. And then that's kind of what led me to getting my real estate license. And so I got licensed, started selling real estate just because I enjoyed the process so much. And then from there, early on, I started, a lot of my investing was just house hacking. So I lived in that first house for about 1.5 years. I found a seller finance deal that was on a single family home, and it had a basement apartment. So we seller financed that. My wife and I moved into the upstairs, and we rented out the basement. And then, from there, it was kind of the same thing for 2 or 3 houses. And then over the past couple of years, I've just started buying mostly duplexes, but a couple of, varying properties to kind of continue investing.
So one thing that agents and really anybody that wants to invest always kind of get caught up in is the down payments and how am I going to afford to keep buying more properties. And you mentioned seller financing, which is something that like before I got into real estate, like you'd reading in a book and you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's not possible. It can never happen. Or like, how would I ever go about doing it? So because you mentioned it, like, can you give us like a little bit of example about like how that deal was structured?
Sure. So I actually found that deal. I went to a local investment club, started talking to people, got on a couple, buyers lists for wholesalers generally who are sending out deals that they find off market, and found this deal. At the time, I made an offer on the property it was basically matching the terms that they were asking for. So what they wanted was, the way that it was kind of structured was, it was more of a lease option than like a true seller finance. But in my mind, I kind of look at them as roughly the same, because I got moved into the property with a lease option, but the entire amount of the rent was going towards paying down the principal that I had to pay off within 12 months. So I basically, got that lease option. Everything I paid in rent went towards paying down the mortgage. And then at the end of that 12 months, then I just cashed them out. I actually ended up selling the property. It needed a lot of work, and there was another opportunity that came up that was, I needed the cash for. So we ended up selling the property after about 12 months, took that cash, rolled it into the next deal. But that very first one, it was just word of mouth. Found the investor who had the relationship with the seller. They said, here's the terms that we want. I don't remember the reason why they wanted those terms, but for whatever reason they did. And so we put a deal together.
So the seller themselves were saying essentially that they wanted to do seller financing lease option out of the gate, or they wanted some other sort of terms, and then you kind of talked them into doing it that way.
Yeah, no, they wanted it initially. I don't remember the reason why. I got, I'm trying to remember why. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they wanted the seller finance terms right off the bat because they didn't want to take the tax hit of selling the property at that time. Because it was kind of a weird situation. They'd been living there, but not really. They had some special stuff going on. And so they said, hey, we don't want to actually sell this property, until, I don't know, it was like 7, 8 months down the road, but we'll give you 12 months just to make it a full year. And like I said, then they ended up selling it instead of, refinancing it.
Yeah, I think this is the first time that like I've really heard anybody ever acquire a property in that way, where the seller was the one kind of driving the way that they were going to sell that property creatively. But that's interesting. Bottom line there is, like you kind of mentioned, you were on a bunch of different lists, analyzing a bunch of different properties. And so how did you create that deal flow? Because obviously in a competitive market like we're in, as we're talking right now, it's 2022, good deals are hard to come by. So how did you create that?
Yeah. So, man, it's been really tough. The last couple deals I bought, the last one I bought was actually off the MLS. So I just found it on the market and, negotiated it and got it done. The two prior to that came from a relationship. That very first townhome I had, I actually sold it. I had a ton of equity from, over the years, ended up doing a 1031 exchange. And as I was getting ready to sell the property, I had already found a buyer for it who said, yeah, I'm looking for a rental property. The numbers look good. And so we kind of just said, hey, if you give me the flexibility on timeline, I'm going to do a 1031. And during that time, to find those two other deals that I rolled it into, it was just a networking thing. I'd called another agent friend of mine who does investing. And we were chatting about something. And at the end of the call, I said, hey, I've got some 1031 money coming up. Do I'm looking for a duplex or a triplex or whatever. And he said, yeah, actually, I do have one coming up next week. Do you want it? And so I got in before it even hit the market. We just put it together. He represented me on the deal. And, it was good for him, good for the seller. It was a quick, clean, easy deal. And I got in, maybe 50 grand under the market value at the time. So deal flow to me, man, I mean, you can find deals on the MLS. I see people flipping houses on the MLS. I see people buying rentals on the MLS. 95% of the stuff, at least in my market, is going to be overpriced when it hits the market. You're really looking for that one deal that the numbers are good, right? And maybe that's because it needs a little bit of work. Maybe they've underpriced it because they just don't know the true value of it. Maybe they don't know what the rents are. Maybe the rents are low. You're looking for that one deal because most of the stuff on the market is going to be overpriced, at least in my market. And the numbers are just not going to make sense. So MLS is great, but also networking, going to these investment clubs, talking to fellow agents, just getting the word out there. Almost every single time I talk to another agent, I say, hey, I've got some money. I'm looking to buy a rental. Do you know of anything? Just a quick, little plug. And what goes a long way for agents, if you tell another agent, hey, I'd love to have you represent me on this, that's like gold to them, right? They're like, sweet, I can double in the deal. And that goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, I talk to so many agents who want to invest, and some of them kind of do the fact that they're an agent almost as a negative to being an investor. I don't have time to be an investor, where what you're saying and what so many people who invest a lot that are agents always tell me is no, that's actually a benefit. That's how I get deals, or how I find them, or I buy deals that my clients don't want. Just all these different things that to me, it doesn't take a lot more time, but because you're in the game, you come across more opportunities. Now,
Absolutely.
You said that so you got licensed after you bought your first property, was it?
Yep.
So when you did get licensed, kind of and I know, not to steal your thunder here, but you've grown a lot kind of as a licensed agent. And I think you were top 1% of all agents in your state, or if not top 2%.
Yeah.
So when you originally got your license, were you thinking that you were going to push that hard, kind of down the retail road, or what was your plan then? And how does that change as time has gone on?
Yeah. So when I got into the business, when I got licensed, I initially looked at it as, so I was in college at the time. I was just coming up on finishing my associate's degree. And I was one of those guys that was going to school for absolutely no reason. It was just like, that was, I don't know, that was the thing to do. So I was in school, had no idea what I was doing. I was going for a business degree, whatever that means. And, it kind of hit me. I'm going to get out of school and get a degree, and I don't have a job lined up. I'm not going anywhere. So that's kind of what led me into like, you know what, let's try this real estate thing. So I wanted to do more investing. At the time, I was incredibly naive and didn't know much, but I thought, this is obviously a good gig. There's a lot of rich people out there that own real estate. So, it must be, something must be working for them. So decided to get my license because I just, like we just talked about a second ago, I knew it was going to be easier, right? It gives you access to the MLS. You're in front of more deals. You're in front of clients who maybe are in a tight spot or know of a neighbor who's trying to sell. I mean, when you're just in the game, you hear rumors, things come up. I mean, it's definitely like the more time that you're in the game doing that stuff, the more opportunities you come across. And it's all about just having conversations. So most of my business for real estate, sales, the retail stuff, it is just buyers and sellers. I do work with a handful of investors as well. I've done a couple land deals recently. It's, but it was never really my vision. What I've always done is said, I want to make as much money as I can selling real estate, and then I'm going to funnel that into investments.
Yeah.
So, I mean, over the years, I don't know, maybe 60 to 70% of my income has gone towards these investments that I've made. And, I'm going to continue doing that until, I grow a pretty big portfolio.
Yeah. Until that income overtakes your active income or something like that. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's another thing that, so many people lose sight of. You're taking 60 to 70% of what you're making and investing it. What have you done to kind of live below your means, either to make so much that you're able to save that much, or just live below your means throughout the course of time to have that much to invest?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of it, I grew up middle class, but it was always kind of like ingrained in my head just from the way that my parents raised me, was like, you had to decide if you really needed stuff. You had to be frugal. So I've always been a frugal person when it comes to just daily expenses, but a big one was house hacking. I, excuse me, I've just recently stopped doing that. I was actually doing that in my own personal house, and we just stopped maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. Just because my wife and we've got 2 kids now. We're kind of at the point where it's like, hey, let's have our own house. We've kind of been tired of it. I mean, we've been doing the house hack thing for the last, I think it was maybe 7 years or so. So that was a big part of it because it kept our housing expenses low. That second deal I was talking about, that seller finance one, the payment on that was about $1,400, and I was renting the basement in that house for about $1,000. So my total all in for me and my wife was $400, and we were living in a great house in a great neighborhood, and it was $400 plus utilities. Is like our living expenses were $600. So that's been a big thing for me personally, is like, house hacking. I think, again, for anybody who's in a situation where they can do something like that, buy a duplex, buy a house with a ADU or a mother-in-law apartment, basement apartment, whatever, and rent it out, because keeping your expenses low goes a long way. And, like I said, I make a pretty healthy income now, but I was still house hacking 4 months ago, just because it's like, hey, yeah, I'll take an extra $1,500 a month. That's more that I can, I can keep my expenses low and just funnel more of that money into more investments.
So how many years in total were you house hacking for?
So I bought that first place in August of 2014. I house hacked up until 2019. There was a small little portion of time in there where we didn't, maybe like 6 months or so, but then we jumped to it. And then just about 4 months ago, we stopped. So 2014 to 2022, that's 7.5 years minus 6 months. So it's about 7 years total.
Yeah. And I think, like, what I like to do anytime that, I talk to anybody that's successful is like dissect like what made them successful. And, what I see a lot is people, they want to have success without sacrifice. And I think you'll admit that, like, probably doing the house hacking wasn't such a huge sacrifice. It wasn't like, you went without food, or, you weren't like, killing yourself, but
Yeah.
it's something a lot of people are unwilling to do. And you said, you did it for 8 years. And I think there's a saying, and I'm going to screw it up, but it's essentially like, you live 10 years how other people won't, so you can live the rest of your life like other people can't. And it's
Yep.
something like that. And every time that I talk to somebody that's had, good financial success, there's always things that they were willing to do, sacrifices they were willing to make that propelled them, forward. And now you've gotten yourself into a point where you're like, hey, I don't really need to house hack anymore. I've sacrificed, but I'm sure you're still making sacrifices in your life today and sacrifices in your business every day, that are helping you to kind of go to the next point. Which brings me to, the next question of like, what, now that you've kind of, gotten a bunch of rental property portfolios, you're cash flowing on all those, you built up some equity, you're making good money as an agent, like, where do you want to go like 5 or 10 years from now with both your real estate business and your investments?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with my real estate portfolio, it mostly consists of duplexes. I've got a couple other properties that are different than that, but it's mostly duplexes. So for me, I've actually been going through this for over the past 6 months or so. I've started thinking, how do I branch out? What's that next step for me? And I kind of come to the conclusion that, it's just jumping into bigger deals.
Yeah.
I look at people who are ahead. There's another YouTube guy, Ben Mala. He's a funny guy on YouTube, and he's got a portfolio of, I don't know, people say $250 million. And one thing that you will learn watching him is he talks about the 1031. He says the 1031 is the best thing you can do to build wealth for your average guy who's not starting the next Facebook or whatever.
Yep.
Like if you're not starting a massive business, like the 1031, because of the tax benefits that come with that and the ability to roll that equity over, when you couple that with appreciation, you can roll up to those bigger deals, and it gets easier and easier, and the numbers get a lot bigger. So that's kind of my path is, over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm going to start rolling a lot of these duplexes, maybe into, bigger multifamily stuff, 8 units, 12 units, 16. It just depends on what comes up. The market's really competitive right now, so it's hard to find those deals. But that would be kind of the goal, either going that route or rolling into, some small retail stuff, commercial, going into, I'm thinking probably like strip mall type stuff, just because it's kind of Amazon resistant. People always need the barber shop or the nail salon. Those are things you can't get on Amazon. So that's kind of where I plan to go on the investment side. But at the end of the day, right now, I still feel like I'm super early on, and I'll look at anything. I'll look at $100,000 deal. If there's money to be made in it, it might be worth my time. But I'm also looking at $1 million deals too. And the thing is, like we talked about a little earlier, you can find money. If the last deal I did, I had no money out of pocket. So you can find private money. You can find seller finance. You can find people who are willing to lend you the money. If you've got an actual deal, the money's easy to find. So that's where I plan to go on an investing side. As far as the agent side, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. The thing that's nice about being an agent is the longer that you're in it, the easier it seems to get. Because people know that you've got some experience. They know your name. They know that you're the real estate guy, whatever. And I've been licensed for this will be my 7th year, and I'm at the point where it's like I just get calls. Like I'm big on YouTube, and so I get calls from that. But even just past clients and stuff, they'll call me and say, "Hey, need to sell my house," and it's like, cool, easy deal, right? So I just plan to continue growing that.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny, you talked about like the money will come when you have a deal. And I see so many people like they worry about getting the money first. And I always say people like, where's the deal? The hardest part right now is finding the deal. I mean, again, this is like market specific where we're at today, talking February 2022. Like there's more money out there than there is deals. So it's damn hard to find a deal, but don't worry too much about like, finding money unless you have a deal. And then the other thing, that you mentioned that I can give you some perspective from, what I've done and what, my company's doing now is, we started out buying all two and three unit, buildings. And what we found is we started to accumulate a bunch of those. Like, they're hard to manage because they're all over the place. You've got so many roofs, so many, like, everything. So
Yeah.
what did is exactly what, you're talking about doing, which is selling off some of those assets or refining some of those assets and putting them into bigger buildings, which, the way that we're getting around, like, the deals being so difficult to find is we're building the apartment complexes. So, again, just kind of like future pacing it for you kind of a little bit, like the law of averages, like having one roof, having like one everything, it just makes everything a lot easier to do. But for everybody who's on the podcast, like, all that you have right now is all that, most people need, right? If you've got, 15, 16 buildings or whatever, like, that's, a success in itself. But it just kind of goes to the point where, like, every time you reach a goal, you're like, okay, look up and, hey, what's next? And there's always more that you can kind of do. But talk a little bit about, like, the people that haven't taken a step, like the people that have gone to real estate seminars, or like they want to invest and they're scared and they haven't, done it yet. What's the biggest piece of advice that you could give to a successful agent that hasn't taken the leap yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing that I always come back to, I know a couple of those people who have money, they have really good incomes, and they want to invest in real estate, but they're just too conservative, too cautious, too consumed by the analysis paralysis, whatever. So I know people like that personally. And the thing that I always say, to get over that and start taking steps 1, 2, 3 to get you to actually owning a deal. Number one, you got to know your numbers. Know what your numbers are and know what your objective is, right? Are you investing for appreciation? Are you investing to park cash? Are you investing for cash flow? What are you looking to invest for? Right? What's the reason why you want to invest? Maybe it's taxes. I see a lot of really wealthy investors who are like, buying deals at super low cap rates just for taxes. So every person's situation is going to be a little bit different, but figure out what those numbers are, and or what that reason is, and then figure out the numbers behind that. So for me, a lot of it's been cash flow focused. I thought, hey, if I can buy a deal and it cash flows, I don't really care how much equity I've got. I don't really care how much, if it goes up or down or whatever. And fortunately, things have all gone up over the last 6-7 years. But as long as it cash flows, I feel like I've got pretty good insulation, whether the market's up or down. So from a long-term perspective, that works for me. My strategy is now kind of shifting where it's not as much cash flow focused, but I need a deal that at least breaks even or has massive value add. So figuring out why you're investing, what you're looking for, and then from there it gets a lot easier, because if you know your numbers and hey, I need a property that cash flows $200 per month. Maybe you're just getting started, you're looking for a single family home, a townhome, whatever it might be, and you just need that first deal. If you need a property that cash flows $200 a month, when you see something pop up that looks like it might be a deal, you run the numbers on it. If it's at $200 a month, you just got to pull the trigger. You got to make an offer. And that's something I've learned over the last couple of years, especially as the market's gotten more competitive, is if you see a deal and it matches your numbers, make an offer, even if it's less than what they're asking. If they want $500,000 for the property, but for you, the numbers make sense at $450, just make an offer at $450. You never know if they're going to accept it or not. So that's really the starting point, I think, in my opinion, is like figure out why you're investing, know your numbers, and then start making offers based on what works for your numbers.
Awesome. And so obviously throughout like the course of your career, like you've gotten educated in a bunch of different ways. Like, what books do you read? What podcasts do you follow? Like, how do you stay educated, and what would you recommend to the people who are listening to kind of, gather some of this information outside, in addition to watching the Agent Investor podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah. Man, books. I love books. I love reading anything about real estate. Early on, I read a lot of just, real estate and the Gary Keller books, real estate, $1 Million Real Estate Agent or whatever. I can't remember the name of it, the big red one. He's got that same book, but in the investing form, it says $1 Million Real Estate Investor or something.
Yeah.
I've read both those books early on. And those are both game changers, especially if you're an agent and you want to invest. Those are the two books I'd recommend for sure, as a starting point. So early on, I read everything, from anything I could find that was real estate related. And
Yep.
after a while, you kind of realize that like real estate, it's just the same thing over and over. So I don't read a ton of real estate books anymore because I don't need to learn how to run my numbers or find hard money or do a seller finance deal. I mean, I've kind of just built up the education for that. So that's no longer serving me. So a lot of the books I read now are actually like mindset books and more like time management. So a couple that I really like, I've got Essentialism here. If anybody's not read this book, absolutely have to read this book. It's a game changer. It talks about what's essential in life, how to maximize your time, how to stop wasting time on $10 tasks and start focusing on the $1,000 tasks.
Yeah.
Game changer. I really like 10X by Grant Cardone. He's kind of a character in himself, but I think that book is really good as far as like kind of just the premise that it teaches you of you got to take a lot of action. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be sacrifice, and you just got to think bigger because there's a lot of things that are possible. So as far as books go, it's a lot of, for me at this point, it's a lot of mindset stuff. It's a lot of, time management, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
And, with podcasts and whatnot, same thing. It's a lot of mindset stuff. I feel like, everybody at some point in their career will come across a point where you've got the information, but you yourself are holding you back. It's your thoughts, it's your mind. It's the negative thoughts that come up. It's maybe, oh, I can't do that, or I don't know how to do that, or whatever. It's all in your mind. So getting past that, I believe if you're not there yet, you will hit that point at some point, and overcoming that and getting to that next level, or getting past that is going to take you to that next level.
Yeah. So a couple things that you said that I want to, key in on as we kind of like wrap. First thing is I asked you like what books you read, and you had a hard time even thinking about like which one to pick. And I think that's another thing that like, as people are kind of like listening to this, that it's just the habits of successful people it's crazy. They're 90% the same. And in terms of like reading or following people or being on YouTube or, listening to different podcasts and stuff like that, I find most often when we interview people is you ask them that question and they're like, oh, you mean out of like the 200 books that I read in the past like few years, like, and it's just a continuous like learning thing. And, I'm not surprised that when I asked you that question, you had a book sitting right next to you that you could pull out. Right. So it's the type of thing that if you're committed to being successful in real estate or any field, but we're talking specifically about real estate, like you've got to be a lifetime learner. There's no such thing as like, hey, this is the one book you read and then you stop then. It's continuous. And then the other thing that you said that I think is interesting is just like the real estate business specifically, it's not a complicated business. It's really not. And like everything that we do in order to be successful, whether it's an agent or investor, it's very simple. And there's somebody in my office, a good friend of mine, he always says, what we do is simple, but it's not easy. And it definitely applies to real estate, being a real estate agent and a real estate investor. Most of us, and it ties into your mindset thing, most of us really do know what to do. It's just a matter of whether or not we're doing it. It's like, okay, we know how to make money, we know how to get into shape, we know how to live a better life, but are we doing it? Which is why, like, as you're talking about, like, your main focus now when you are educating, it's like, I know what to do, but I have to get my mind right to make sure that I'm doing it every day. So I want to thank you, for jumping on today. I know we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. For any of our listeners who want to learn more about you or reach out to you in any way, what's the best way they can learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help. If anybody's got questions, they want to pick my brain or whatever, I'm an open book. I'll tell you all the numbers, the finances, everything. So I love talking to people and helping. I love giving back, that's something that's been really important to me throughout this process, because I've had people in my life who've done that. And so I got to pay it forward. So you can reach out to me. My email is pretty simple. Cody@fastutahhomes.com. Just like it sounds. I'm sure maybe you'll have it in the description or show notes or whatever. And, or you can find me on YouTube. A lot of my real estate business, including investors that I work with, comes from my YouTube channel. So if you just type in Cody Steck Real Estate, one of my videos will pop up and you'll be able to find me there and learn more about me or what I'm doing or whatever. Maybe that's an introduction to just kind of what I'm doing.
Cool. All right, Cody. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. And guys, we'll be back again next week with another episode of the Agent Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Caffarella. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.